Tonight, let us move slowly into a kingdom that does not hurry for our understanding, a kingdom that appears after rain, beneath bark, along old roots, under snow, inside stone, in the dark scene between life and decay, the kingdom of fungi. If you have ever walked through a forest and felt that something was happening just beneath what you could see, you were not imagining it. The ground below leaves and moss is not still, it is threaded. Mycelium, alive, with filaments so fine that they can pass through grains of soil, so persistent that they can outlast trees, and so important that without them, the green world above would begin to fade. Mushrooms are only the brief and visible part of that hidden life. They are the soft lanterns and umbrellas that rise for a little while, release their spores, and sink again into the work below. The true body is usually elsewhere, woven underground, inside wood, between stones, through dung, through fallen trunks, through the dim architecture of the living earth. That hidden body is called mycelium. And if the mushroom is a sentence, the mycelium is the long, quiet language beneath it. If the mushroom is a wave, the mycelium is the sea. It is tempting to place mushrooms beside plants because they sprout from the ground and seem to belong to gardens, fields, and forests. Yet, fungi are not plants. And in some intimate ways, they are nearer to animals than to trees. They breathe oxygen. They release carbon dioxide. Their cells are built not with cellulose, like leaves and stems, but with chitin, the same strong material found in insect shells and the armor of crustaceans, deep in evolutionary history. Fungi and animals share a branch of kinship, a reminder that resemblance can be deceptive, and that the forest floor is filled with relatives we would never have guessed. This alone changes the mood of a walk in the woods. The pale mushroom near an oak root is not a simple little plant after all. It is a living being from a neighboring branch of life. Neither animal nor vegetable, but something older than our categories. Something that learned to live by absorption, by partnership, by chemistry, by waiting. It does not chew. It does not photosynthesize. It dissolves, trades, penetrates, remembers, and transforms. Its patience is measured not by footsteps or seasons, but by cycles of damp and dry, by centuries of soil building, by the slow collapse of wood into richness. Imagine, for a moment, a forest after rain. The trunks are darkened. Needles and leaves hold a fine silver on their edges. The air smells deep and mineral, touched by moss, bark, and the cool sweetness of rot along the path. Mushrooms have risen in the night. Small ochre buttons push through leaf litter. A bracket fungus holds to a fallen trunk like the shelf of an ancient library. Farther in, a white cap has opened like a parasol. All of this feels sudden, almost magical, as though the forest had dreamed them into being before dawn. But the truth is slower and even more beautiful. These fruiting bodies are the visible moment in a much longer hidden preparation. The mycelium below has been gathering energy, storing resources, reading moisture, temperature, season, and signal. Then conditions align, and the mushrooms rise. This ability to appear almost overnight has helped give fungi an aura of mystery. In every culture that has lived close to weather and land, what comes up so quickly seems enchanted. What emerges from damp earth without warning seems as though it crossed from another realm. Fairy rings, ghost lights, witch's butter, toadstools, elf cups. The names alone reveal how deeply mushrooms have stirred human imagination. They do not merely exist in nature, they behave like symbols. Even before we understand them, they arrive at thresholds. After rain, after fire, after death, after dark, they bloom where change is happening. And change is truly their domain. Fungi are among the great transformers of Earth. Without them, leaves would not return easily to soil. Fallen trees would remain locked in their own hardness. Nutrients would stay trapped in dead tissue. Whole forests would begin to drown in what they once were. Fungi release enzymes that can break apart lignin and cellulose, those resilient structural materials that make wood and leaves hold their shape. In doing this, they perform one of the most essential acts in all ecology. They turn endings into beginnings. They are not simply associated with decay. They are the intelligence of decay, the graceful unmaking that makes all future growth possible. If you picture a forest floor as a kind of library of past seasons, fungi are the readers who can actually open the sealed books. They take the stored sunlight of old summers, locked inside wood and stems and bark, and they return it to circulation. The leaves of this year are fed by the fall of last year. The roots of the young tree are nourished by the collapse of the old log. Every soft patch in the woods, every dark, crumbly inch of rich soil has been edited and prepared by countless fungal lives. Yet fungi are not only dismantlers, they are also partners. Some of the most astonishing relationships in nature happen between fungi and plants, at the tips of roots, in the cool, dark seams of soil. Fungi join with trees and grasses in intimate exchange. The fungal threads extend the plant's reach, drawing in phosphorus, nitrogen, water, and trace minerals from spaces roots alone could never fully search. In return, the plant shares sugars made from sunlight. It is a trade as old as forests. Carbon for minerals, sweetness for access, light for depth. Through these mycorrhizal partnerships, forests become more than collections of individual trees. They become communities linked by fungal mediation. We sometimes call this the wood wide web, which is a lovely phrase because it hints at connection without pretending the forest is a machine. Through fungal networks, resources can move from one plant to another. A shaded seedling may receive carbon from a larger tree. Chemical warning signals may travel when insects attack. The forest that appears above ground as trunks standing apart is below ground, laced into relationship. Fungi are the translators, courrier, and negotiators of that hidden common life. There is something deeply calming about this thought, that beneath apparent separateness, there may be exchange, the old supporting the young, the sunlit feeding the shaded, the living preparing the ground for what comes next. A forest is not merely a crowd, it is a slow conversation. And fungi are among its most eloquent speakers. Some fungal networks become astonishingly large beneath a meadow or mountain forest. A single mycelial organism can spread across distances so wide that to walk through the landscape is to walk across one being. In Oregon, the famous honey fungus occupies several square miles underground, making it one of the largest living organisms known. The mushrooms that appear are only local expressions. Temporary fruiting towers rising from a body so broad and so hidden that it could be mistaken for the forest itself. To imagine this is to revise scale. Vastness is not always a whale, a redwood, or a mountain. Sometimes vastness is thin as thread and buried in silence and silence. With fungi is important. We tend to associate power with visible movement, wings, speed, noise, muscle. Fungi remind us of another form of strength. Their force is not dramatic. It is accumulative. They work through persistence, multiplication, infiltration, cooperation, and chemical artistry. A mushroom does not need to outrun anything. It needs only to arrive. Dissolve, connect, fruit, and endure. A mycelial thread can enter microscopic cracks in stone, soil, bark, shell, and bone. Given enough time, enough damp, enough contact, it changes the world. This patient transformation may be one reason fungi feel slightly otherworldly. They occupy timescales that we can understand intellectually, but not always emotionally. A mushroom may rise in a single night, yet the network beneath it may have taken years to build. A lichen can slowly weather stone over decades, even centuries. A fungal colony may remain hidden until rain, fire, thaw, or death invites it outward. To notice fungi is to become more sensitive to time. In layers, the quick event, and the long preparation beneath it. Some fungi glow in darkness. This is one of the loveliest truths in natural history. In certain forests, on humid nights, mushrooms can shine with green or bluish light, so softly that they seem less like objects than moods made visible. The chemical machinery of bioluminescence turns decay into radiance. Rotten wood may gleam. Small clusters along a branch may appear like stars, caught low among roots. Fireflies are not the only creatures of cold light. Some fungi, too, have learned to illuminate themselves, perhaps to attract insects, perhaps for reasons we are still uncovering. Science explains the reaction. Luciferin, luciferase, oxygen, energy. But even with explanation, the sight remains tender and uncanny. Light emerging from the work of decomposition that is almost a philosophy. Such moments invite a quieter kind of wonder, not the loud wonder of spectacle, but the slow wonder of realizing how much beauty is folded into processes we might otherwise overlook. A glowing mushroom is not an ornament placed on the forest by fantasy. It is the forest expressing one of its real possibilities. It tells us that the line between scientific truth and enchantment is thinner than we are taught. Sometimes accurate knowledge does not flatten mystery. It deepens it. Fungi also lead us into questions of survival. At the edge of what seems possible, spores, those tiny reproductive bodies, are miracles of durability. They drift through air by the billions. They settle on bark, skin, water, windowsills, doom, stone, bread, grain, and cloud. A breath of outdoor air may contain thousands, invisible to us. They are one of the constant biological presences of the atmosphere. We inhale them, exhale among them, live in a weather of fungal possibility. Many spores are so small and light that they can travel astonishing distances, rising into high atmospheric currents, crossing seas, passing above cities, moving between ecosystems like dust with intention. Their walls protect them from dryness, ultraviolet light, and long exposure. In experiments, some fungal spores have endured the vacuum of space, extreme cold, and intense radiation. That does not mean mushrooms are waiting to bloom on every planet, but it does widen the imagination. Life in fungal form can become portable in ways that challenge our sense of fragility. A spore is a tiny vessel of patience, a little capsule built to wait through poor conditions and awaken when moisture, warmth, and matter align. When scientists consider whether life might travel between worlds, fungal spores inevitably become part of the conversation. The idea is ancient in spirit and modern in detail, that life may be more migratory than we once believed. And even if no spore has ever seeded another planet, the mere fact that some can endure such brutality reminds us that life has strategies beyond softness. Mushrooms look delicate. Their spores are not. There are fungi that flourish where we would expect almost nothing to live, in the ruins of nuclear disaster zones. Melanized fungi have been found growing in conditions saturated with radiation. Their dark pigments, similar in some ways to melanin in our own skin, appear to interact with radiation in remarkable ways. Some researchers have even suggested these fungi may be using ionizing radiation as a kind of energy source, a process compared to photosynthesis, though darker, stranger, and less understood. Whether we imagine them as eating radiation or merely enduring it with extraordinary elegance, they remind us that life's boundaries are broader than our fears. The same is true in deserts, in polar cold, inside rocks, beneath snow, and in salty, nutrient-poor places. Endolithic fungi live within stone. Lichens survive complete drying and revive when moisture returns. Cold-tolerant species fruit under frost. Pyrophilous fungi appear after fire. Dung fungi launch spores with astonishing speed from the waste of grazing animals. Marine fungi inhabit reefs and driftwood below the tide line, wherever matter accumulates, wherever surfaces meet chemistry, wherever there is a niche made by patience and contact. Fungi are likely to explore it, and what a range they display. Some mushrooms are so tiny they could rest on the head of a pin. Perfect little cups or parasols, visible only if you kneel very close. Others swell to the size of a ball, heavy with spores, like moons laid in grass. Some smell like maple syrup, coconut, almonds, anise, cinnamon, bread, or even chocolate. Others smell like carrion, zivage, or old flesh, luring flies as efficiently as flowers lure bees. Some bleed red droplets, some stain blue where bruised, some resemble coral. Antlers, fingers, nests, ears, stars, tongue, trumpets, chandeliers, or shelves. The fungal imagination of form is almost inexhaustible. These shapes and scents are not frivolous. They are strategies, ways of dispersing spores, retaining water, discouraging predators, attracting insects, or simply surviving under local conditions. Yet, to us, they arrive as art. This is one of the recurrent gifts of natural history. A structure evolved for practical ends can still feel like sculpture. A cap meant to protect gills can resemble a silk umbrella. A sticky slime meant to attract flies can shine like lacquer. A cup designed to splash spore packets outward with rain can look exactly like a miniature bird's nest. Nature does not make beauty for us. And still, beauty keeps occurring. Human beings have responded to that beauty for thousands of years. Mushrooms appear in cave imagery, in folk tales, in textiles, in field guides, in illuminated manuscripts, in still life painting, in animation, in ceramics, in myth. They sit at the edge of the domestic and the wild. Some are cherished foods, some are feared poisons, some are sacrament, some medicine, some warning, some decoration. This layered cultural life mirrors their ecological one. Mushrooms are never just one thing for very long. Consider food. For instance, the fungal kingdom feeds us directly and indirectly in ways so ordinary that we easily forget their strangeness. Yeast, the microscopic fungal cousin of mushrooms, makes bread rise and ferments beer, wine, and countless other drinks. Every loaf that swells in the oven is lifting on the exhalations of fungi. Every bubbling vat, every sourdough starter, every fragrant crust carries a quiet fungal labor. Long before humans knew what microbes were, we were partnering with them in kitchens and breweries, guided by experience, smell, timing, and trust. Civilizations have been built partly on fermentation. Fungi have flavored ritual, feast, storage, and survival. Then there are the mushrooms we eat whole, chanterelles, with their apricot perfume, shiitakes, with their deep savory warmth, oyster mushrooms, layered like shell fans, porcini rich as autumn earth, morels, honeycombed and hollow, lion's mane, trailing pale spines, like frozen waterfalls, chicken of the woods tearing into tender strips, lobster mushrooms, bright as coral. Some taste meaty, some taste nutty, some, when dried, become almost sweet. The culinary world of mushrooms is a lesson in texture and aroma, in how the forest can become food without losing all its wildness. And yet the forest asks for respect. The line between delicious and deadly is sometimes thin. The death cap, quiet and pale, contains toxins capable of destroying the liver and kidneys. Other species cause violent illness, hallucination, paralysis, or slow organ failure. Some are edible only when cooked. Some are inedible because of bitterness. Some are harmless but easy to confuse with lethal relatives. Mushroom knowledge has therefore always carried an ethical tone. Observe carefully. Learn humbly. Do not assume. In this way, fungi train attention. They reward patience and punish arrogance. They are beautiful teachers. Because they insist that wonder be accompanied by care, care extends into medicine as well. Fungi have altered human health profoundly. Penicillin, discovered in a mold, transformed bacterial infection from a frequent death sentence into something often treatable. Cyclosporin made organ transplants far more viable. Statins derived from fungi lowered cholesterol and changed cardiovascular medicine. Medicinal mushrooms used in traditional systems are now studied for immune modulation, anti-inflammatory effects, neuroprotection, and more. Lion's mane has attracted attention for compounds that may stimulate nerve growth factors. Reishi has long been associated with longevity and balance. Shiitake and turkey tail continue to be explored. For bioactive molecules, not every traditional claim will survive modern scrutiny, but enough have done so to remind us that forests and laboratories are not opposites. Often, they are stages in the same search. In the quiet body of a mushroom or mold, there may be a molecule unlike anything we would have designed ourselves, shaped by competition with bacteria, by fungal self-defense, by the long improvisation of evolution. Fungi are chemists of deep time. They make enzymes that digest wood, compounds that stun insects, pigments that buffer light, aromas that recruit flies, molecules that inhibit microbes, and structural materials that combine strength with lightness. To study fungi is partly to study a hidden pharmacology and engineering program already running across the planet. This is why fungi now interest not only biologists, but architects, designers, environmental scientists, and space researchers. Mycelium can be grown into packaging, insulation, bricks, acoustic panels, furniture, and leather-like materials. It is light, strong, often fire-resistant, and biodegradable. Instead of mining, extruding, and discarding, one can imagine cultivating, shaping, drying, and returning. A house insulated with fungal material would not merely be built from nature. In the old sense of wood and stone, it would be grown from a network that once fed itself on agricultural waste and later returned to soil, without lingering centuries as trash. There is a deep elegance in this. Fungi take leftovers and make form. They turn waste streams into materials. They can help clean oil spills, bind pollutants, and absorb heavy metals. Some species digest polyurethane and other stubborn compounds. Others support crops by improving nutrient uptake and resistance to disease. In a world burdened by excess extraction and excess disposal, fungi offer a different model: circulaire, absorptive, decomposable, adaptive. They suggest that the future might look less like domination of matter and more like partnership with living processes, even at the scale of weather and climate. Fungi may play roles we are still learning to measure through their partnerships with plants. They help move carbon into soil and keep some of it there for long periods. Mycelium binds earth, reduces erosion, and stabilizes nutrient cycles. Spores can act as nuclei around which water droplets form in clouds, subtly joining the atmospheric story of rain, forests. Through fungal mediation, do not simply stand in climate, they participate in it. The hidden threads below and the invisible spores above form a kind of breathing between ground and sky. Perhaps this is one reason fungi invite philosophical reflection so easily. They dissolve boundaries that humans prefer to keep neat: life and death, individual and community, organism and environment, food and poison, medicine and mystery, soil and sky, darkness and light. The mushroom rises from death, but also feeds life. The mycelium links separate roots into exchange. The glowing cap makes decay luminous. The spore rides air like weather. The medicinal compound comes from a mold. The poison wears a pleasing shape. Fungi live in thresholds. And maybe that is why they so often feel like symbols of transformation. But they are not merely symbols. They are also actors in dramas, far stranger than metaphor. Cordyceps fungi infect insects and alter behavior in ways that still seem almost fictional. When first encountered, as spore lens on innate, the fungal body develops within it. Somehow, the ant's behavior shifts. It climbs to a height suitable for the fungus. It bites down. It dies, fixed in place. A fruiting body grows from it and releases spores below. This is not a story invented to make nature eerie. It is one of the many ways evolution solves the problem of dispersal. To us, it feels gothic. To the fungus, it is logistics. Other fungi hunt nematodes with microscopic snares, sticky loops, or constricting rings. Some live on dung and launch spores with record-setting accelerations so that their offspring may land on fresh grass and eventually pass through grazing animals. Some wait for fire before fruiting. Some rely on beetles, flies, slugs, pigs, dogs, or unsuspecting humans to move them. truffles remain underground and advertise themselves with irresistible aroma. Puffballs turn their bodies into spore reservoirs and exhale smoky clouds when struck by rain or footsteps. Birds' nest fungi turn raindrops into catapults. Everywhere in the fungal world, there is invention through form. This inventiveness extends into reproduction itself. Some fungi reproduce sexually and asexually, switching strategies according to circumstance. Some species have vast numbers of mating types, thousands upon thousands of genetic compatibility categories. What humans often imagine in simplified terms becomes, in fungi, exuberantly complex. Diversity is built right into the rules of their continuance. A forest may seem calm on the surface, but among its fungi, there is constant experimentation, branching, mingling, recombination, dormancy, and dispersal. A patient storm of evolutionary possibility. The oldest fungal lineages stretch far back into Earth's history. Fungi were present long before forests, as we know them. They helped weather rock into soil. They likely played a crucial role in helping plants colonize land, joining early roots and extending their reach into a barren world. Some fossil organisms, interpreted as giant fungi, may once have towered over ancient landscapes before trees grew tall enough to replace them. Whether or not every such interpretation remains unchanged, the broad truth is secure. Fungi are ancient terrestrial pioneers. They are not later additions to a green world. They helped make the green world possible. Hold that image for a moment. An early Earth, rocky, rough, with only the first thin films of life negotiating land, and there, among the pioneers, fungal partnerships begin the long preparation of soil. They dissolve minerals, stabilize surfaces, share nutrients, host algae in lichens, build conditions that plants can follow. We tend to tell the history of life through animals because animals move in ways our eyes understand. But if Earth were to tell the story differently, perhaps it would speak of fungi as preparers, quiet architects, without whom the more dramatic forms could never have flourished. That sense of foundational support continues into the present. Without fungi, forests would fail, grasslands would impoverish, crops would struggle, nutrient cycles would jam, debris would mount, and much of the carbon and oxygen balance we depend on would shift disastrously. This is not poetic exaggeration. It is ecological structure. Fungi are not decorations on the margins of life. They are among its central processes. They make the living world breathable, fertile, and renewable. Yet because so much of their work is hidden, fungi remain easy to ignore. Until mushrooms appear, it is a little like noticing waves, but forgetting the sea. The fruiting body is the event that draws our gaze. A bright cap, a ring in grass, a shelf on bark, a glow in darkness. But the truer lesson is elsewhere. The real kingdom is below, within, between, mycelium in the soil, yeast in dough, mold on fruit, lichens on rock, fungal partners in roots, guts, skin, air, waste, and wood. To begin noticing fungi is not to become interested in one odd group of organisms. It is to notice a mode of life braided through almost everything. This mode of life has its own temperament. Fungi are absorptive rather than ingestive, collective rather than singular, infrastructural rather than performative. They are experts in contact. Their world is surface, moisture film, pore space, capillary channel, chemical gradient. A mycelial thread grows, not with dramatic gestures, but with intimate negotiation, sensing and branching, pausing and penetrating, fusing and retreating. It moves as possibility through matter. The more closely one studies that movement, the more difficult it becomes to think of intelligence only in animal terms. Fungi do not think as we do, but they do sense, adapt, signal, allocate, remember in biological ways, and solve local problems with impressive sophistication. Researchers studying electrical signaling in fungi have found patterns that resemble pulses, spikes, shifting sequences. Some have compared them, cautiously, to primitive forms of communication. We should be careful not to romanticize our force equivalence. A fungal network is not a brain. Still, it is not inert. It responds to food, injury, light, moisture, gravity, toxins, and neighboring organisms. It changes growth patterns accordingly. It can alter how resources are distributed through the network. It can become more efficient. It can, in some contexts, seem to encode previous conditions in its later responses. Memory may not require neurons to exist in a meaningful form. Life has many ways of carrying yesterday into tomorrow. There is comfort in broadening our idea of mind, not because everything becomes human-like, but because the world becomes richer with alternative kinds of responsiveness. The forest is no longer just populated by beings that move visibly, and those that do not. It becomes alive with different tempos of awareness. The tree reads light and water. The fungus reads chemistry and contact. The lichen reads drought and stone. The moss reads seepage. The insect reads scent and current. Each life form is tuned to a different music, and together they create an environment that is less a backdrop than a chorus. If you have ever sat quietly in woods until the ordinary began to feel immense, you may know this shift. At first, there is scenery. Then, slowly, there are presences. The log is not a log, but a layered city of beetles, mosses, fungi, bacteria, and memory. The soil is not dirt, but an economy. The mushroom is not a decorative cap, but the brief announcement of an underground kingdom. Science, when told gently, often does this. It does not remove the hush from things. It reveals why the hush was earned. Mushrooms, perhaps more than many organisms, invite that style of attention because they join the intimate and the cosmic. They are small enough to kneel beside and strange enough to lead us towards space travel. Carbon cycle. evolutionary history, and planetary resilience, the same kingdom that makes a loaf rise and a stump rot may also help us design biodegradable materials, heal polluted land, understand symbiosis, and imagine how life could survive beyond Earth. This range is astonishing, but it never feels arrogant. Fungi do not boast. They simply continue. Picture an old forest at twilight. The canopy is thinning into evening. A few last birds call from higher branches. Damp coolness gathers close to the ground. Under one tree, a ring of mushrooms marks the expanding edge of a colony. Under another, a bracket fungus stacks itself in shelves. Each year's growth, another line in a wooden chronology. A slug moves across a cap, leaving a silver path. Invisible spores drift. Beneath all this, the mycelium extends in countless directions, binding, digesting, exchanging, storing, signaling. Nothing is rushed. Everything is happening. That hidden happening is one of the reasons sleepy science feels so natural. When speaking of fungi, their world is not about spectacle that demands constant alertness. It is about gradual revelation. You can drift with it and still keep learning. In fact, drifting may be the correct way. Mushrooms are easiest to understand. When we stop insisting that meaning arrive all at once, they ask us to think in threads, in moisture, in recurrence, in emergence. They ask us to notice what is usually underfoot. Onabak, under notice. Even the emotions fungi evoke are layered. There is delight in the edible, luminous, fragrant, and beautifully shaped. There is unease in the poisonous, parasitic, and flesh-scented. There is respect in the medicinal. There is hope in their ecological usefulness. There is humility in their age and necessity. There is almost tenderness in their patience. All these feelings can coexist because fungi themselves coexist with many roles. They are healers and killers, builders and dissolvers, delicacies and dangers, ruin and repair. To enter their kingdom is to let contradiction become natural. This can be a soothing lesson in its own way. The world does not need to be simplified to be livable. Complexity is not always chaos. Sometimes complexity is what allows resilience. The forest survives because many roles overlap. The soil remains fertile because countless processes interlock. The mushroom can be both a warning and a gift. The same kingdom contains poison and bread, disease and antibiotics, corpse, flowers of smell and maple sweetness, decay and architecture. Balance is not sameness. It is the capacity of many unlike forces to continue together. Perhaps that is why the image of mycelium has become so compelling in modern thought, not because it offers a perfect metaphor for society, technology, or mine, but because it quietly reveals a truth we keep relearning. That support often happens invisibly. The most essential systems are frequently the least glamorous. Networks matter, maintenance matters, exchange matters. Healthy life depends on hidden labor, performed steadily over time. Fungi have embodied that truth for hundreds of millions of years, and yet, despite all their utility, they never become merely useful. a mushroom remains somehow itself. Strange. Soft. Ofte brief. Often beautiful. Easily bruised. Full of old chemistry. Ancient lineage. And improbable design. To see a cap push through moss is still to feel a small thrill. To find a fairy ring in a meadow is still to imagine dance. To smell anise from a broken stem is still to laugh softly at the impossible familiarity of it. To touch a puffball and watch smoke rise is still to feel the childlike pleasure of hidden release. Knowledge does not drain these moments. It lets them settle more deeply. So, let us wander a little farther through specific corners of this kingdom, not as collectors of facts, but as travelers moving through rooms of one vast house. In one room, there are lichens on stone. At first glance, they seem like stains. Pale green maps, orange crusts, gray scales, powdery blues, but each lichen is a collaboration, usually between a fungus and an alga or cyanobacterium. The fungus provides structure, protection, and water retention. The photosynthetic partner provides sugars. Together, they can inhabit bare rock, freezing tundra, desert cliff, weathered roof tile, gravestone, and branch. They are among the first makers of future soil. They are intimacy made visible on the skin of the world. In another room, there are truffles underground, hidden and fragrant. They do not raise their spores into the wind. Instead, they perfume the soil, enticing animals to dig them up, eat them, and carry their reproductive future elsewhere. Their scent works on pigs, dogs, rodents, flies, and humans. One kingdom recruiting another through appetite. Luxury cuisine often enters here. But beneath the market price, there is a simple ecological brilliance. If you cannot reach the air, become irresistible to those who can move through it. In another room, rain strikes bird's nest fungi and launches their peridioles. Nearby, another species waits until internal pressure is perfect, then fires a dark spore mass outward at impossible speed. It sounds absurd until you remember that for the fungus, the challenge is precise. Escape the waste, land on vegetation, survive digestion, begin again. Nature often looks like comedy from far away, and engineering from close up. In another room, under a conifer in late evening, a cluster of small mushrooms emits a greenish glow. The needles around them catch a faint reflected light. You crouch, and the forest changes scale. Suddenly, the ground is not ground, but night sky. Each little cap becomes a lantern. Each thread of moss, a dark hill. Each bit of bark, a fallen planet. Science names the chemistry. Night receives the image. Neither cancels the other. In another room, a death cap stands deceptively calm. Its fatal chemistry hidden behind ordinary grace. Here, fungi remind us that attention matters. Beauty is not a guarantee of safety. Knowledge is part of reverence. The woods can nourish or harm, depending on how we meet them. Sleepy science does not hide that. It softens the voice. Not the truth. In another room, reishi hardens into lacquered antlers on wood. Lion's mane cascades from a trunk like a white waterfall. And turkey tail bands itself in concentric colors on a decaying log. These are medicinal icons now. But even before their extracts and capsules, they were striking beings. Forms so particular that they seem to ask to be remembered. In another room, glowing mushrooms burn low in darkness, while elsewhere, stinkhorns rise quickly and announce themselves with the smell of death. Here again, beauty and disgust sit side by side, and both are simply methods of moving spores. In another room, an ancient fungal fossil lies embedded in stone, and beyond it, a laboratory studies how melanin-rich fungi respond to radiation, how mycelium might build habitats on Mars, how fungal materials could replace foam and leather, how underground symbioses store carbon. The room of the future opens directly from the room of deep time, and perhaps in the largest room of all, invisible but central, mycelium extends in every direction, through the soil, around root hairs, across air pockets, through damp bark, over fallen leaves, into buried wood. It is not dramatic, but it is endless in implication. It is the living lace beneath ecosystems. To imagine it is to imagine the earth not as a pile of separate objects, but as a woven condition. The longer one thinks about fungi, the more they seem to offer a gentle correction to human habits of seeing. We prefer edges, names, ownership, visibility. Fungi favor gradients, exchange, infiltration, hiddenness. We like to know where one thing ends and another begins. Mycelium passes through that desire and softens it. A root is itself, yes, but it is also fungal. Soil is itself, but also woven. A loaf is bread, but also yeast. A forest is trees, but also networks. The correction is not meant to erase individuality. It is meant to show that individuality is often supported by relationship. This can be a peaceful thought before sleep. You do not need to solve the world tonight. You only need to remember that much of what sustains life happens quietly and without announcement. There are threads at work beyond what you can see. There are processes mending, exchanging, dissolving, rebuilding. Leaves become soil. Wood becomes softness. Sugar becomes bread. Pollution may become less fixed. Waste may become material. Fear may become knowledge. Darkness may glow. And fungi, with their calm persistence, become an emblem of that transformation. Not the flashy kind that arrives all at once, but the real kind. The kind that seeps through systems, alters foundations, and allows new forms to rise later. They do not ask for applause. They ask only for conditions. Perhaps that is why mushrooms so often appear in stories of portals and thresholds. They belong wherever one state changes into another. Forest to field, rain to fruiting, fire to renewal, death to nutrient, wood to soil, Night to glow, grain to bread, grape to wine, illness to medicine, waste to material, isolation to network, Earth to imagined Mars. They are not merely residents of transitions, they are specialists in them. As we continue drifting through this kingdom, let us slow even more and look closely at scenes that fungi make possible. A dead log in autumn lies, half-sunken leaves. At first it seems solid, but touch it, and your fingers enter a softness like damp cake. Bracket fungi line one side, thin, white hyphae web, the underside of loose bark. Beetles tunnel through softened wood. A moss cushion has begun at one end. What you are touching is not simple rot. It is collaboration. Fungi opened the wood. Insects followed. Moisture lingered. Bacteria joined. Moss took hold. The log is becoming future ground. Time has texture here. A meadow after several wet days carries a pale ring of mushrooms. Children might call it a fairy circle. Mycology explains it as outward growth from a central colony. Nutrients exhausted in the middle. Fruiting at the advancing edge. Both descriptions, in their own ways, are about pattern and wonder. The ring is geometry made by appetite. The grass within may be greener or poorer, depending on the species. Because the fungus changes the chemistry beneath, even the folk name contains a truth. Something has indeed danced there. Only the dancer was underground, at the edge of a field. An old dung pat glistens slightly in morning light. From it rise tiny fungi with translucent stems. Nearby, another species waits until internal pressure is perfect, then fires a dark spore mass outward at impossible speed. It sounds absurd until you remember that for the fungus, the challenge is precise. Escape the waste. Land on vegetation. Survive digestion. Begin again. Nature often looks like comedy from far away, and engineering from close up. Under a conifer in late evening, a cluster of small mushrooms emits a greenish glow. The needles around them catch a faint reflected light. You crouch, and the forest changes scale. Suddenly the ground is not ground, but night sky. Each little cap becomes a lantern. Each thread of moss, a dark hill. Each bit of bark, a fallen planet. Science names the chemistry. Night receives the image. Neither cancels the other. In a kitchen, flour, water, and salt become dough. It rests. Yeast feeds. Carbon dioxide builds. The mass rises almost invisibly. Warmth enters the oven. The crust browns. Steam escapes when cut. This domestic miracle is also fungal life. The same kingdom that fruits among roots is here in the quiet inflation of bread. The forest and the kitchen are not as far apart as they seem. In a laboratory, mycelium grows through agricultural waste, packed into a mold over days. It binds the particles into one coherent body, dried and heat-treated. It becomes packaging, grown differently. It becomes leather-like sheet. Panel. Bloc. Composite. The logic is old. Fungi have always bound loose matter into structure. We are only beginning to ask them to do it in forms we need. In a hospital story from the 20th century, a mold contaminates a dish. and kills bacteria around it. A nuisance becomes a revelation. Penicillin emerges. Millions live who might not have. This too belongs to the fungal kingdom. Not because fungi are benevolent in a human sense, but because their own chemical wars against microbes happen to intersect with our needs. We benefited from a conflict that was never about us. In a burned forest, blackened trunks stand in quiet rows. Then, after the right weather, morels begin to appear, ridged, hollow, precious to foragers. But ecologically, more than culinary, fire altered the substrate. Nutrients shifted. Competition changed. Some fungi answer catastrophe with fruiting. Their arrival is not celebration exactly, but it is continuation. After flame, life reorganizes. Fungi are often among the first to understand how. If we keep moving through such scenes, a broader feeling gathers. Fungi are not side notes to nature. They are how nature continues through disturbance. They are the processors of aftermath. They turn events into conditions for what follows. This makes them unexpectedly comforting companions for human thought. Our lives too contain aftermaths. Old versions of ourselves. Losses. Abrupt changes. Things that had to end before anything else could begin. Fungi do not offer sentimental answers to this. They offer process. What is broken down is not erased. It is transformed into availability. Matter moves on. Structure softens. New relationships become possible. The mushroom on the old stump is not denying the tree that fell. It is using that fall to support another stage of life. There is no need to force that into metaphor. If you do not want to, it is enough to let the image rest nearby, somewhere under dark soil. Threads continue their work, somewhere in leaf mold. What looked finished is becoming fertile, somewhere after rain. What was hidden becomes briefly visible. That rhythm has comfort in it, and there is still more to marvel at. Some fungi can dry almost completely and revive later. Some can survive freezing solid. Some can inhabit radioactive ruins. Some stain vivid blue when cut, as though air reveals a secret they were keeping under the skin. Some secrete pigments used as natural dyes, painting wool in gold. Rust, olive, plum, and rose. Some are so bitter. They seem to have evolved a taste-based shield. Some produce hallucinogenic compounds that alter human consciousness profoundly and have been used in ceremony for centuries. Some create red droplets like lacquered blood. Some mimic coral reefs. Some grow in caves. Some live inside seeds. Some may influence how clouds gather water. The fungal kingdom is not exhausted by any one documentary voice, any one field guide, any one evoke. This inexhaustibility is another reason it pairs well with sleep. You do not need to hold it all. You can let details drift past like spores. A glowing cap, a hidden network, a loaf rising, an ant climbing, a ring in grass, a shelf on bark, a smell of anise, a poisoned green cap, a medicinal lion's mane, a black finger from the soil, a giant underground organism older than many civilizations, a lichen slowly writing itself across stone, a cloud seeded by spores somewhere above a city. These images need not become a test. They can become atmosphere, a soft widening of the world before rest. So let us soften even further now. And imagine the hidden kingdom beneath us, below the floorboards of a cabin, below the lawn behind a house, below the park path, below the forest trail, below the farm field, below the mountain moss. The soil opens into layered darkness. There are pockets of air, films of water, grains of sand, fragments of leaf, roots as fine as hair, pebbles, bacteria, meat, springtails, nematodes, dormant seeds, tiny chambers lined with old organic matter, all stitched by threads too thin to see in a casual glance. Mycelium travels there with calm insistence. It branches when food is near. It fuses when compatible strands meet. It diverts around toxins. It thickens in favorable routes. It digests and passes along. It remembers. In the bodily way that growth patterns remember, where luck once lay, here, in this dark, there is no spectacle. And yet, this may be one of the busiest and most consequential places on Earth. The life above depends on it. Trees drink through it. Carbon settles through it. Water lingers because of it. Nutrients move because of it. Seeds find their first alliances here. Dead things become usable here. The hush of the underground is not emptiness. It is labor without theater. Perhaps that is the final gift of fungi to the imagination. They make hidden work feel holy, not in a doctrinal sense, in a quiet sense, in the sense that what is essential need not always be seen. A mushroom appears, and for a little while, the kingdom sends up a sign. Then it sinks back. The sign is lovely, but the kingdom remains. Whether we notice or not, it goes on beneath our arguments, our cities, our markets, our wars, our neglect. It glows in one place. It rots wood in another. It raises bread. It heals infection. It poisons the careless. It feeds the careful. It prepares soil for future roots. It waits in spores for rain. And waiting may be one of the gentlest lessons here. Fungi wait expertly. They do not confuse stillness with failure. A spore can remain dormant. A mycelium can stay hidden. A lichen can pause almost to lifelessness in drought. Conditions matter. Timing matters. The kingdom is old enough to know that emergence need not be constant to be real. As night deepens, this lesson becomes softer still. You do not need to force fruiting in every hour. Not every process is visible. Some parts of life are meant to happen underground for a while. Preparation has dignity. Dormancy has value. Slow exchange matters. Transformation can be invisible. Until one damp morning, when suddenly something has changed. And if sleep comes while thinking of mushrooms, perhaps it will come in this spirit, not as shut down, but as a return to hidden work, the mind lowering into its own mycelial state, memories sorting like nutrients in soil, dreams rising like fruiting bodies. From networks you do not fully see, rest, too, is a kind of underground process, quiet on the surface, active beneath. So now the forest darkens completely. The path is no longer distinct. The trunks become vertical shadows. Somewhere, perhaps, foxfire glows on a fallen log. Somewhere, a puffball waits for rain. Somewhere, Spores climb an air current above rooftops and power lines, somewhere under a city sidewalk. Mycelium threads through compacted earth, beside roots looking for space, somewhere in a bakery. Yeast is breathing in dough left overnight, somewhere in a laboratory. A dish blooms white at the edges, somewhere in a burned valley. Morels prepare to rise, somewhere in old stone. Lichens continue their almost imperceptible weathering, somewhere inside wood. A bracket fungus adds another pale margin to its shelf. Somewhere an ant bites down on a leaf vein. Because a fungus has already written the next movement, somewhere a tiny mushroom the size of a grain of rice opens briefly in moss. And no human being ever sees it, and still the kingdom continues. Immense, hidden, precise, calm. It has been here longer than forests. It has helped make the soil beneath forests. It has fed plants, animals, and people. It has ended lives and saved lives. It has perfumed kitchens and darkened ruins. It has turned death luminous and waste useful. It has endured radiation, frost, drought, and the vacuum of space in its scattered spores. It has written circles in grass and lanterns in rot. It has lived in stone, in bread, in cloud, in root, in doom, in medicina, in myth. When we say mushroom, we often mean the cap. When Earth says mushroom, it may mean a whole way of continuing. Let that thought loosen gently now. You do not need to hold every detail. Let them settle like spores through still air. Let the glowing ones glow. Let the poisonous ones stand at a respectful distance. Let the edible ones remain on their mossy plates. Let the underground threads continue their unhurried exchange. Let the old log soften. Let the bread rise. Let the clouds gather around invisible nuclei. Let the stones slowly become future soil. Let the kingdom do what it has always done. Transform, connect, endure. And as the world grows quieter around you, imagine lying above a deep and living weave, beneath your room, beneath the street, beneath the fields and hills beyond. The earth is threaded with patient intelligence of another kind, not a mind like yours, but a persistence you can borrow comfort from. Fine white strands moving through darkness, carrying the memory of rain, the chemistry of roots, the promise of mushrooms not yet risen. No hurry, no noise, only the slow circulation of life through hidden channels. The last image can be simple: a forest floor after midnight, damp leaves, cool bark, air rich with the scent of rain and earth. Here and there, soft shapes of mushrooms leaning from wood, lifting from moss, waiting in grass, far below. The mycelium stretches on beyond the reach of sight, into hollows, under stones, around roots. Through the quiet body of the world, it does not sleep in the way we do. Yet, it knows the night well. It knows how to work unseen. It knows how to hold one season inside another. It knows how to turn the fallen into the fertile and the hidden into the briefly luminous. Stay with that, weaving a little longer. Because the more we look at fungi, the more ordinary places begin to change shape around them. A garden stops being only a garden. and becomes a theater of negotiations. The mulch around a shrub is not just decoration, but a temporary banquet. The underside of a flower pot is a cool district where molds may gather when the air is kind to them. The forgotten orange in a bowl is a future landscape. The shower tile, the cellar wall, the windowsill dust, the compost heap, the cellar onion beginning to soften, the cardboard box in the damp shed. All of these belong, in part, to fungal possibility. Their kingdom is not only in deep forest romance, it is in kitchens, barns, bakeries, archives, greenhouses, hospital air systems, beehives, orchards, and basements. It is in every place where moisture meets time and matter waits to be changed. That may sound unsettling at first, but it is also intimate. Fungi are not distant curiosities. They have been housemates. For as long as humans have built shelter and stored food, we learn to live with them by trial and tradition. Drying grain, baking bread, aging cheese, cleaning walls, monitoring rot, fermenting drink, storing herbs, learning which growths meant danger and which meant flavor. The human story is not simply a story of conquering microbes. It is also a story of choosing our fungal companions wisely. Some we welcome to the table, some we keep from it, some we study, some we fear, some we hardly notice, until they bloom in a forgotten corner and remind us that life is always ready to continue. When conditions permit, there is something very ancient in this domestic partnership. Before refrigeration, before sterile packaging, before laboratory culture, humans already knew the moods of fermentation. Dough had to be fed, watched, and read. Wines had to be coaxed. Soy sauce, tempeh, miso, sake, cacao fermentation, cheese rinds, cured meats, and many regional staples, all emerged from long attentions to microbial processes that included fungi at their core. The result is that whole cuisines, even whole senses of cultural identity, carry fungal fingerprints. A nation may imagine itself through bread, tuber, vine, or preserved foods, without always remembering that a kingdom of mostly unseen organisms helped make such tastes possible. And because fungi shape flavor so profoundly, they also shape memory. The smell of bread can return someone to a childhood kitchen. The earth-deep aroma of sautéed mushrooms can recall an autumn meal, a grandparent's pan, a market in rain, a dim restaurant with warm windows. Truffles shaved onto pasta can become not just luxury, but an atmosphere. Candlelight, quiet voices, a tablecloth, the feeling that the evening has thickened into something memorable. Fungi, through scent and fermentation, become custodians of recollection. They participate in emotion through chemistry. Chemistry, in their world, is almost a kind of language. Mushrooms speak to animals through smell. They speak to bacteria through antibiotics. They speak to plants through exchange. They speak to us through flavor, toxicity, color, and altered consciousness. Even their pigments can seem like messages, though the message is often simply this: here I am. Do not miss the body that must be touched, eaten, avoided, carried, or admired. A red cap among brown leaves does not need to intend beauty for us to notice it. Its color may guard against damage, attract a creature, or arise as a side effect of metabolism. Yet, the forest becomes more readable because of it. Fungi mark the hidden with signs. Some of those signs are almost playful. Candy cap mushrooms, when dried, release an aroma like maple syrup. Others carry notes of marzipan, coconut, cucumber, shellfish, fresh meal, or wet flour. There are mushrooms that smell like radish, and mushrooms that smell like apricot. Some hold a fruity perfume when young, and lose it with age. For foragers and mycologists, scent becomes part of identification, a reminder that vision alone is not enough. To know a mushroom well, one may have to kneel, bruise, slice, inhale, and wait. Knowledge arrives through the senses together. That makes the study of fungi peculiarly embodied. Even the field guide, with all its photographs and keys, cannot replace the quiet act of being there with the organism itself. And being there matters, because fungi are creatures of place. The same species may differ in shape or abundance, depending on tree partner, soil chemistry, recent weather, altitude, disturbance, and season. A chanterelle in one forest may be expected near oak, while in another it appears beneath pine. Morels can favor burns, orchards, floodplains, or certain old groves. Some mushrooms follow buried wood, fruiting where no visible tree remains. Others are faithful to dunes, bocks, alpine meadows, salt marshes, or tropical litter. The fungal kingdom is global, but each appearance is local. To find one kind of mushroom often requires learning a habitat. As much as a species, you begin to notice what tree roots are underfoot, what the rain was like 2 weeks ago, how the slope holds moisture, how the air smells after thaw. In this way, mushrooms train a person into deeper landscape literacy. A forager becomes attentive not only to caps and stems, but to moss, bark, canopy, drainage, history of fire, age of woods, and the temperament of a season. Even people who never gather a single edible mushroom may find that learning fungi sharpens perception generally. You begin to see logs not just as dead wood, but as stages of succession. You notice that one patch of grass has fairy rings because chemistry is changing beneath it. You wonder what is binding the soil under your feet, what spores are drifting after rain, what mycelial alliances keep a seedling alive in shade, the whole world becomes more layered. Layered is the right word. Because fungi live across scales at once. Consider a single bracket fungus on a trunk. To a passing hiker, it is an object. To an insect, it may be food or habitat. To the tree, it is an infection or decompose. To bacteria, its tissues are territory. To the broader forest, it is part of nutrient recycling. To a materials scientist, its growth pattern may inspire design. To a physician, its chemistry might be a clue. To a photographer, it is form and light. To folklore, it may be a step in a stairway for spirits. None of these views is entirely wrong. The fungal kingdom invites plural seeing. That is especially true with psychoactive mushrooms, which stand at the intersection of biology, ceremony, medicina, and controversy. For many traditional cultures, mushrooms containing psilocybin were not recreational novelties, but sacraments, means of entering altered states in carefully held contexts, songs, prayers, healers, night vigils, and communal frameworks surrounded their use. Modern clinical research has revisited these compounds and found promising effects in some settings for depression, trauma, addiction, and end-of-life distress. Yet the old ambiguity remains. A mushroom may be medicine, ordeal, opening, or danger, depending on dose, preparation, intention, place, and person. Fungi remind us here, too, that effects are relational. No compound exists in a vacuum from culture. Amanita muscaria, the red and white mushroom of fairy books, offers another layered story. It has appeared in ritual, folklore, winter iconography, and modern fantasy. Its chemistry differs greatly from psilocybin mushrooms, and its effects can be unpredictable and often unpleasant. Yet its image has become almost shorthand for mushroomness itself. The archetypal cap under which an elf might shelter, or a child in a story might crawl. Perhaps that is because it looks exactly like what the imagination expects. From a thing that rises overnight, from moss, it seems too composed, too theatrical, too clean in its colors, to be accidental. But accidental beauty is one of nature's specialties. Then again, perhaps our imagination was trained by real encounters. A people living near birch and pine, seeing redcaps after rain, listening to stories by firelight, needing memorable signs for danger and wonder, would naturally elevate such a mushroom into symbol. Folklore is often ecology translated into narrative. Fairy rings warn and enchant. Poisonous caps become witches' seats. Glowing wood becomes foxfire. Mushrooms that appear after storms seem tied to thunder or spirits. We speak in myth first, because myth is a quick way to hold memory. Science later refines the causes, but the old emotional shape often remains. That emotional shape is not childish. It is one of the ways humans learn to keep knowledge alive. Before formal taxonomy, a name that carries awe or caution, can preserve survival, even now. Though our classification is richer, we still respond to mushrooms almost archetypally. The edible ones feel like gifts. The bioluminescent ones feel like secrets. The poisonous ones feel like disguised threats. The medicinal ones feel wise. The giant underground mycelium feels almost divine. The zombie ant fungus feels like a warning. From a deeper logic than ours, mushrooms continue to operate in the borderland between evidence and imagination. Not because evidence is weak, but because the evidence itself is so strange. Take the phenomenon of fairy rings. Scientifically, we understand the basic mechanism. A fungal colony grows outward from a center point, consuming nutrients as it goes, and producing mushrooms at the active edge. Depending on the species and soil, the ring may encourage lush grass at one zone and poorer grass at another. It can persist, widen, break, and reform over years. But when you actually stand before one in misty grass, especially at dawn or dusk, knowledge does not cancel wonder. The geometry is too elegant, too complete, too calmly mysterious. A perfect circle of mushrooms in a field feels like a signature. It suggests that the earth itself can draw, and sometimes it can draw in spirals, arch, and wavefronts beyond rings. Fungal growth can create patterns which resemble mathematical diagrams, not because mushrooms know geometry in an abstract sense, but because growth under constraints produces order. Nutrients diffuse, edges advance, interactions with roots, moisture, and barriers alter the line. In this way, fungi become living examples of how pattern emerges naturally from process. There is comfort in that. Beauty need not always be planned. It can arise because matter follows its own quiet rules, consistently, over time. This is true underground as well. Imaging studies of mycelial networks reveal architectures that sometimes resemble maps of cities, neural branching, river deltas, or transportation grids. Nutrients move along efficient routes. Less useful paths may thin. Resource-rich patches become hubs. Organisms living alongside the fungus use its surfaces like roads. Bacteria travel along hyphae. Small invertebrates graze or hide among the threads. Soil particles become knitted. If one were tiny enough to wander there, the underground would not feel blank. It would feel infrastructural. A dense civic life built from fibers and films. What an extraordinary thought, that beneath each quiet step, there may be a metropolis of exchange. No wonder fungi make such powerful metaphors in modern culture. Yet one must also remember that the metaphor is grounded in reality. The Wood Wide Web is not mere poetry. It is based on actual mycorrhizal systems and measured transfers. Though sometimes popular accounts simplify or exaggerate them, the truth is subtler and still beautiful. Fungal networks do not turn forests into perfect utopias, but they do make cooperation and interdependence materially possible in ways we are only partly beginning to understand. Subtle beauty is often more durable than exaggerated beauty anyway. It leaves room for mystery. Mystery lingers too. In the relationship between fungi and weather, spores rise into the atmosphere. Some may help seed water droplets. Forest emissions influence cloud formation. Microbes travel through air masses and return in rain. The boundaries between biosphere and atmosphere blur. A spore produced on a rotting log may drift into a cloud system and come down days later on a distant mountain. In that sense, fungi participate in planetary circulation. Their lives are not confined to the ground. They are travelers of the sky, even if we never see them there. The thought itself changes a storm. Rain no longer belongs only to ocean evaporation and cooling air. It may also carry traces of forests, of rot, of mushrooms that briefly rose and vanished. And if spores can ride so high, so far, it becomes easier to imagine their importance to colonization and resilience after disturbance, volcanic eruption, glacial retreat, floodplain formation, landslide, fire. Fungal spores may arrive. Among the first biological scouts, lichens and pioneering fungi begin the patient conversion of bare mineral surfaces into living crusts. Early partnerships emerge. Soil thickens. Other organisms follow. Succession begins. The green world above is often impossible without the gray and invisible preparations below. Fire provides one of the most dramatic examples. After forests burn, the human eye initially registers absence, char, ash, black stems, silence. But the ecological story is not only one of loss. Certain fungi are exquisitely tuned to post-fire conditions. Their spores or buried structures survive. And after the heat changes soil chemistry and clears competition, they fruit in abundance. Morels are the culinary celebrities here. But many other fire-following fungi appear as well. They help recycle the changed material, stabilize the ground, and open pathways for future plant communities. Destruction, in their presence, is not the last chapter. It is a condition to be worked with. This does not sentimentalize fire. It acknowledges continuity. Fungi are masters of continuity in disturbed systems. They do not prevent every disaster, but they know how to enter the aftermath. In that sense, they are among Earth's finest responders, not emergency sirens, but humble crews arriving with enzymes and threads. Pollution has drawn us to fungi for similar reasons. Where oil saturates shorelines or soil, certain mushrooms and molds can help break down hydrocarbons. Where heavy metals contaminate ground, some fungi absorb and concentrate them. Where synthetic materials persist stubbornly, a few species can begin to unravel them. None of this is a magical cure-all. Bioremediation is complicated, context-specific, and often incomplete. Yet even the possibility is heartening. Nature carries chemistries capable of answering some of the damage we create. Not every answer will scale. Not every species can be turned into a cleanup crew, but the principle matters. Healing may grow from the very organisms we are most prone to overlook. The same quiet practicality appears in agriculture. Farmers are increasingly interested in inoculating soils with beneficial fungi that improve plant nutrition, drought tolerance, and disease resistance. Instead of treating land only as a medium for inputs and extraction, one begins to see it as a living community whose health determines the resilience of crops. Mycorrhizal fungi do not merely feed plants, they help structure soil, influence root architecture, and mediate interactions with other microbes. A healthier underground can mean a steadier above-ground harvest. There is a soft revolution in that thought. The future of farming may depend not only on seeds, machines, and chemicals, but on restoring unseen relationships. Relationships define the fungal kingdom so consistently that even individual bodies can be hard to interpret outside them. A mushroom on a tree may be killing it, healing the ecosystem by recycling it, or doing both over different timescales. A mold on fruit may be spoilage from our perspective, and opportunity from another organism's. A yeast in dough is a worker. The same yeast in a bloodstream could be a medical issue. Context matters. Fungi are not inherently good or bad. They are responsive. They use niches. They exploit conditions. If those conditions align with our desires, we call them helpful. If not, we call them harmful. The kingdom itself simply continues its ancient negotiations. That moral neutrality can feel almost serene. The mushroom does not hate or love. It fruits because fruiting serves survival. It glows because glowing evolved. It poisons because toxins defend tissues or alter interactions. It heals us accidentally because our biology intersects with fungal chemistry. There is no cosmic lesson written there in words, yet humans keep finding lessons anyway. Because fungal life quietly demonstrates principles that resonate: patience, interdependence, transformation, hidden labor, adaptation, renewal after disturbance, emergence at the right moment. Perhaps the most dreamlike of these principles is emergence itself. A mushroom is one of the best examples in nature of how much preparation can lie beneath a sudden event. One evening, there is only ground. By morning, there are fruiting bodies, pale and delicate, scattering spores into cool air. The emergence feels instantaneous, but the network below has been preparing. This is true in many parts of life. Not only fungi, yet mushrooms make it visible with unusual grace. They rise like evidence. That invisibility does not mean inactivity. Something may be happening for a long time before it can be seen. For a tired mind, that can be reassuring. Not everything valuable has to announce itself immediately. Not every period of quiet is empty. There are underground seasons in lives, as well as in forests. Ideas rest. Healing knits slowly. Strength returns beneath notice. Then, one day, a visible change appears that seems almost sudden from the outside. Fungi are small ambassadors of that truth. Another ambassador is the spore. So much possibility, packed into so little structure. Hard-coated, light enough for wind, patient enough for waiting, numerous enough to trust chance, delicate enough to vanish if conditions are wrong. A puffball releasing trillions of spores is an image of abundance meeting uncertainty. Most will fail, a few will not. The species continues through generosity toward chance. In some strange way, that too is calming. Life does not require certainty to proceed. It only requires enough attempts, enough endurance, enough openings. If you could watch a forest through fungal time, it would look very different from the time of mammals. trees would still seem slow, but mushrooms would flicker, rain, fruiting, frost, pause, fire, flush, fallen branch, colonization, trunk death, shelves, leaf fall, decomposition. Seasons would feel like breaths, and decades, like the patient widening of underground maps, whole hillsides would be connected. By hidden veins of exchange, a single giant organism might persist, while generations of deer, birds, and humans passed overhead, unaware. The very ground would seem less like a surface and more like a memory bank. Memory in fungi is a subtle topic, but a beautiful one. Experiments suggest that past exposures can influence later behavior, as though the organism's history alters its future responses. Patterns of growth may retain traces of earlier conditions. Resource allocation may become more efficient after previous encounters. Again, this is not memory in the narrative sense. A fungus does not reminisce, yet its body carries history and form. In that respect, it resembles many other living systems, including landscapes themselves. A river remembers flood through its banks. A tree remembers wind through its shape. A fungus remembers nutrient and stress through its network. Memory need not be spoken to be real. At night, the idea of such quiet memory feels especially soft. Everything around us carries its past in hidden ways. The wood in a table remembers seasons of growth. Soil remembers leaves. Stone remembers pressure. Bread remembers yeast. Wine remembers fermentation. The mushroom remembers rain enough to rise. Perhaps this is why old forests can feel wise. Without being sentimental, they are accumulations of interactions, held in material form. Fungi are among the keepers of that archive, and their archive is not only terrestrial. Marine fungi inhabit seagrasses, driftwood, sediment, coral environments, and the surfaces of ocean life. We still know far less about them than about their land-dwelling relatives. But they widen the kingdom outward into salt. Fungi do not stop at shorelines. They travel with tides, decompose marine plants, interact with algae, and perhaps contribute more to ocean ecology than we yet understand. The sea has its own hidden mycelial stories, though they are harder for us to imagine, because water obscures and disperses what soil gathers and holds, from sea to desert, from tundra to rainforest, from garden bed to reactor ruin. Fungi adapt by exploiting interfaces where two conditions meet. There is opportunity, wet and dry, dead and living, root and soil, light and shade, fresh wound and healing tissue, burned ground and new colonizer, dung and grass, animal and spore, rock and lichen, human technology and biodegradable replacement. Fungi live in interfaces, because interfaces are where exchanges happen. In a way, this makes them one of the best kingdoms for teaching relational thinking. Nothing about a fungus makes full sense alone. One asks immediately, with what tree, in what substrate, under what weather, dispersed, by whom, helpful to which plant, toxic to which animal, growing after what event, used by what culture, studied for what chemistry? Everything sends you outward to connection. Mushrooms refuse isolated understanding. That is part of their charm. Charm may seem an odd word for organisms that can also dissolve flesh, poison dinners, infect lungs, or erase amphibian populations through disease. Yet charm is still right. Because fungi are not simplistic, their dangers are real. And so is their allure. The chytrid fungus that devastated amphibians reminds us with brutal clarity that fungal pathogens can reshape ecosystems on a global scale. White nose syndrome in bats, Dutch elm disease carried by fungal agents in beetles, rusts in crops, mildews in vineyards. The kingdom can wound as well as heal. To study fungi honestly is to accept this full range. Sleepy science can hold discomfort without sensationalizing it. Softness of tone does not require false sweetness. In fact, the truth becomes more soothing when it is neither exaggerated nor denied. Mushrooms are wondrous, not because they are innocent, but because they are real. They embody the world as it is: generative, dangerous, beautiful, opportunistic, connective, and deeply interdependent. Rest is easier when reality is allowed its complexity and still found worthy of attention. Now imagine a long corridor in a natural history museum, but lit gently, almost dimly, as though meant for evening visitors. Along one wall stand cases of ancient fungal fossils, delicate traces in stone, filaments mineralized before forests properly rose. Along another are models of giant prototaxites-like towers from deep time, when strange landforms of fungal or fungus-like life may have stood taller than most neighboring organisms. In the next room, there are living displays: yeast bubbling in flasks, mycelium crawling over substrate, lichen crusts on stone, glowing mushrooms under controlled darkness, time-lapse screens of caps unfurling after rain. Farther on, you pass medical exhibits: penicillin, cyclosporine, statins, medicinal mushroom extracts, then environmental ones: bioremediation, carbon storage, biodegradable packaging, mycelium leather, then cultural ones: shamanic bundles, painted scrolls, embroidered caps, folk tales, recipes, bread, wine, cave art, field baskets. If such a museum existed as an evening dream, fungi would be one of its quietest yet most expansive galleries. Every case would say the same thing in a new dialect. Hidden does not mean minor, and there are so many hidden things still ahead in fungal research. New species are described constantly. Many more remain unknown. Tropical canopies, deep soils, caves, marine sediments, insect bodies, and old-growth forests all likely harbor fungal lineages we have never named. We know perhaps only a fraction of what exists. Estimates of global fungal diversity vary, but all suggest enormity. Millions of species may inhabit the Earth. most unseen, unclassified, their chemistries untouched, their ecologies partly guessed at. There is something deliciously humbling in this, even now. In an age of satellites and sequencing, a vast kingdom remains largely undiscovered underfoot. Discovery itself changes in the fungal world. It does not always come with dramatic expeditions. Sometimes it comes with kneeling in leaf litter, or swabbing a cave wall, or sequencing soil DNA, or watching a petri dish do something odd. Sometimes it comes from indigenous knowledge, long overlooked by formal science. Sometimes from chefs, sometimes from farmers, sometimes from artists paying attention to form. Fungi dissolve disciplinary borders as easily as they dissolve wood. To know them well, one needs chemistry, ecology, anthropology, microscopy, patience, and wonder together. Wonder together. Perhaps that is the best phrase to carry into the late part of this journey, because by now, the details are many. And yet they all belong to one feeling. The world is threaded with more relationship than first appears. Mushrooms make that visible in flashes. A cap rise, and suddenly an underground network becomes imaginable. A loaf rises, and suddenly yeast becomes intimate. A medicine works, and suddenly mold becomes historical. A glow appears, and suddenly rot becomes beautiful. A ring forms, and suddenly grass becomes geometry. A truffle perfumes the soil, and suddenly appetite becomes dispersal. A lichen grips a stone, and suddenly a cliff becomes a collaboration. The details differ. The underlying astonishment remains. As the hour grows later, it becomes pleasant to let those flashes widen and soften into one continuous landscape. Not a list of facts now, but a mood of connection. There is a mountain slope in rain, where old conifers stand over feather moss, and under the moss run fungal threads, older than the saplings nearby. There is a tropical log at night, carrying green lamps of bioluminescent caps, while beetles wander through shadows like moving punctuation. There is a field after storm, where parasol mushrooms rise by morning and collapse by tomorrow. Brief as weather itself, there is a cellar with wheels of cheese, whose rinds are being written by carefully tended molds. There is an orchard floor in spring, where morels appear between old roots, because the season has finally tilted just right. There is a laboratory in which a white colony spreads over sawdust, binding it into a material that might one day replace foam. There is a desert rock whose interior shelters fungi, waiting out dryness that would kill most visible life. There is a city breath, carrying spores above traffic, connecting lungs and clouds to forests miles away. There is an old fallen birch, dissolving into softness through the patient appetite of bracket fungi and invisible allies. There is a bowl of dough on a counter, covered with cloth, quietly swelling as yeasts exhale. There is a truffle underground, sending up a perfume to summon the feet and snouts of wanderers. There is an ant fixed to a leaf vein, because a fungal life cycle required a higher place there is a microscopic trap in the soil. Tightening around a nematode, there is a post-fire hillside, where fungi are already turning ash into future fertility. There is a grave marker, slowly weathered by lichens, into a softer edge of memory. There is a child touching a puffball and laughing as spores rise like smoke. There is a doctor prescribing a drug, whose story begins in fungal chemistry. There is a mycologist on hands and knees, in a damp hollow, smiling at a species smaller than a fingernail. There is a whole giant organism beneath a forest, quietly being one body under many mushrooms. Seen this way, the kingdom of fungi becomes less a chapter of biology and more a style of reality. 1. Based on continuance through contact, it does not dominate space in the manner of forests or reefs. Instead, it infiltrates, collaborates, decomposes, resurfaces, and waits. It is the slow intelligence of breakdown and rebuilding, and still we have barely spoken of color in all its extravagance. Imagine wax caps in old meadows, red and yellow as spilled sweets, amethyst mushrooms tucked under beech leaves, like bits of dusk, indigo milk caps bruised and bleeding blue, orange peel fungi bright on black soil after rain, purple quartz hidden in conifer shade, white hedgehogs under birch. Each tooth beneath the cap, soft and improbable, coral fungi, branching cream, rose, or gold, black horns of plenty like folded shadows, somehow both ominous and elegant, a kingdom often associated with earth tones, can suddenly flare into jewel and flame. When the season is generous, it is a reminder that camouflage is not the only fungal strategy. Sometimes the world wants to be found, at other times, it wants to be nearly missed. Tiny pin mushrooms on a twig, translucent and exquisite, may vanish from notice unless light catches them. Slime moles, which are not true fungi, but so often share their stage in our imagination, creep and bloom like living paint. Mold filaments on a forgotten lemon can become a pale blue city overnight. A thin white bloom on bark may be the first sign of a much larger presence. Fungal life teaches humility by reminding us that scale governs perception. There are kingdoms in a crumb, ecologies in a breeze, architectures in a spoonful of soil. So much of modern life encourages the opposite of this noticing. We rush above surfaces, valuing what is large, loud, productive, and immediately legible. Fungi offer another curriculum. Look down, wait, learn names, accept uncertainty, touch carefully, smell, return after rain, observe relationships, understand that usefulness may be hidden, that beauty may be brief, that decomposition is not failure, that support is often subterranean. It is difficult to imagine a better set of lessons before sleep. But now, perhaps, the words themselves have become a kind of mycelium, threads spreading through the dark, linking image to image, fact to feeling. If so, let them continue gently without effort. We do not need to push toward conclusion. Fungi are not conclusive creatures. They prefer cycles, A cycle begins with a spore, but it also begins much earlier. Because beginnings in the fungal world are always relative. A spore lands where it can. Moisture awakens it. A hypha emerges and begins to explore if another compatible strand is found, if food is sufficient, if chemistry allows. A colony forms. It spreads through the substrate, branching, digesting, absorbing. Time passes, conditions shift, the network persists, expands, or rests. Eventually, perhaps after rain or seasons turn, fruiting bodies rise, spores are released, the visible phase dissolves, the hidden phase continues. To us, the mushroom seems like the event. To the fungus, the event may be only a brief gesture. In a much longer continuity, there is something peaceful. In aligning briefly with that longer continuity, your own life has visible phases and hidden phases too. There are times when everything is fruiting, speaking, working, showing, making, and there are times when the real labor happens below notice. Gathering, healing, learning, storing, waiting. The fungal model suggests that both are necessary. The visible cannot happen without the hidden. The hidden need not apologize for itself. Night understands this already. The world after dark is not empty, only differently active. Fungi fit night particularly well, because so much of their meaning depends on what cannot be seen clearly. The glow of foxfire is more beautiful because darkness receives it. The smell of a truffle seems deeper because it emerges from unseen soil. The sudden mushroom after rain feels more magical because its preparation happened out of sight. The fungal kingdom meets darkness, not as an enemy, but as an ally in revelation. If you were to leave a lamplit room now and walk slowly into wet woods, your eyes would adjust, shapes would simplify, bark would become pattern rather than texture, moss would gather what little light remained. Then, gradually, smaller things would begin to appear. The pale face of a mushroom turned upward, the lacquered shine of a shelf fungus, perhaps even the soft phosphorescence of bioluminescent growth on an old log. Under that reduced world, attention deepens. You stop trying to see everything. You begin to notice what offers itself. Sleep is similar. It is not total erasure. It is a narrowing into subtler forms of perception, and perhaps that is the final reason mushrooms belong so beautifully to sleep stories and sleepy science. They are experts in thresholds of perception. Too small, too hidden, too brief, too sudden, too old, too strange, too quiet, and yet unmistakably present. Once noticed, they train us to love the nearly overlooked. They make subtlety feel immense. Let the pace slow again now. Let the forest become simpler. A stem lifting through moss, a cap holding rain, gills arranged with impossible delicacy beneath, a spore cloud invisible, unless the light catches it just so, a thread moving through soil around a root tip, a loaf rising under cloth, a green glow on a log, a dark ring widening in a meadow year after year, a lichen bright on stone after drizzle, a shelf fungus writing another line on wood, a truffle waiting under leaves, a puffball full of future, a hidden network. Under all of it, calm and continuous. None of these images asks anything difficult of you. They only ask to be held softly for a moment, then released. The kingdom of fungi does not mind being released. It will remain. That is one of its strengths. It does not need your constant attention to keep working, even forgotten. It transforms the world. And so, perhaps this is how to leave the subject, not by ending it sharply, because fungi resist sharp endings, but by letting it fade back underground. The facts settle into soil, the images dim into leaf shadow, the brighter mushrooms close like lanterns at a distance. The scientific names become less important than the felt truth behind them, that the earth is alive in hidden ways. That support often happens below sight. That decay can be generous. That beauty can emerge from damp darkness. That life continues through threads, somewhere beyond hearing. Fungal networks are still extending through the night, somewhere beyond sight. Spores are still drifting, somewhere in old wood. Enzymes are still unlocking stored summers, somewhere in roots. Sugars and minerals are still being exchanged, somewhere in kitchens. Yeasts are still breathing, somewhere in quiet laboratories. New materials are still growing, somewhere after fire, after flood, after loss. Fungi are already entering the changed ground and beginning again. You do not need to follow them everywhere. It is enough to know they are there, beneath the last thought, beneath the last image, beneath even language. Imagine simply the cool, dark body of the earth, porous, fragrant, full of old leaves and fine roots and hidden water. Through it runs a pale web without hurry. It touches stone, wood, seed, bark, bone, shell, and soil. It knows how to wait. It knows how to bind. It knows how to soften what is hardened and feed what has newly begun. It knows how to remain largely unseen and still be essential. It knows how to turn the world over, gently, from one season to the next. If the mind wants a final comparison, let it be this. Mycelium is like weather underground, slow weather, intimate weather, weather that does not sweep branches, but moves through the dark between particles, carrying nutrients instead of clouds, carrying readiness instead of thunder. And above that underground weather, mushrooms rise now and then, like little moons, little bells, little roofs, little flames, little ghosts. They appear, they offer their spores, they bow back into the hidden. That is enough. That has always been enough. And because the night is long enough for one more slow wandering, let us drift once more through the oldest lesson fungi offer, that life is never only what stands in the light. The leaf takes sunlight and makes sugar. The mushroom waits below and makes that sunlight shareable again. The tree rises, the fungus spreads, the flower blooms, the mold returns what has fallen, the animal feeds, the yeast ferments, the lichen grips bare stone, until bare stone is no longer bare. Everywhere, the kingdom is involved. In the quiet completion of things, think of an autumn forest, after many years untouched. The ground is deep with histories, needles from old winters, lie beneath the leaves of recent ones. Branches have snapped and softened. Trunks have fallen and become nurse logs. Seedlings rise from rotting wood. Because fungi first made the wood soft enough to hold moisture and roots, the oldest tree in the grove may be standing partly because fungal networks around its roots still gather scattered nutrients from far beyond its own reach. Nearby, another fungus may be weakening a different trunk, not out of malice, but because every forest needs openings as well as pillars, gap, and canopy, death and seedling, shade and light. Fungi do not pick sides. They keep the cycle moving. In old-growth woods, this becomes especially clear. A fallen giant is never just loss. It becomes habitat. Spunge, scaffold, pantry, nursery, and future soil. Bracket fungi arrive first on exposed surfaces. White rot, brown rot, and soft root fungi. Each work their different chemistries, dissolving lignin or cellulose in distinctive ways. Beetles follow the softened fibers. Birds follow beetles. Moss and liverworts settle into the retained damp. Ferns root in the crumbling seam. What had one form becomes many. The log remains a log in shape for years, sometimes decades. Yet inwardly, it has become a whole society. Fungi are the first translators in that conversion, and the same spirit of translation continues. In places far from wilderness, a compost pile in a small backyard is its own warm republic of decomposition. Kitchen scraps, leaves, coffee grounds, cardboard, stems, bales, and rainwater gather into a mound. Steam may rise. On a cold morning, fungal threads lace the darkening matter. What was once leftovers becomes soil amendment. Smelling rich and alive, compost is one of the most hopeful human practices, precisely because it accepts the fungal truth that discarding is not the only fate of what is used. With the right companions and conditions, remnants can become nourishment. Even archives and libraries, places built to defy time, are in a relationship with fungi. Conservators know the danger of humidity because mold can bloom on paper, leather, glue, and cloth. Yet even here, there is a kind of reluctant respect. Fungi remind us that all preservation is temporary negotiation. Every book is made from former life, from plant fibers and animal glues and mineral pigments. And fungi know how to read those materials. In the literal sense of consuming them, we build climate control. To keep our stories intact, the fungal kingdom waits for loosened conditions. It is not cruel. It is simply old, and old enough to understand that all matter returns eventually to circulation. There is gentleness in acknowledging that, especially at the end of a day. We spend much of life holding shape, identities, plans, schedules, rôle, possessions, opinion. Fungi belong to the opposite movement. They soften rigid forms. They remind the world how to release. Not everything should be released at once. Of course, structure matters, but so does the ability to let finished forms become food for what comes next. Without that ability, the world would harden into its own past. Fungi prevent that hardening. They keep reality porous. Perhaps porosity is the right final word before rest. Soil is porous. Wood becomes porous under fungal touch. Bread becomes airy because yeast fill it with gas. Lichens open rock, grain by grain. Mycelium moves through pores, too small for roots. Even our understanding becomes more porous. After spending time with mushrooms, the borders between categories loosen. We become willing to imagine intelligence without brains, architecture without blueprints, medicine without human invention, beauty without intention, resilience without noise. Now the pace can grow slower still. Imagine mist settling low over a meadow where fairy rings have appeared. Imagine the cool underside of a log where white threads glow faintly in memory. If not in light, imagine a single spore lifting upward on an almost imperceptible current. Imagine a truffle asleep in the dark, fragrant even before anything finds it. Imagine a loaf at midnight, quietly rising in a silent kitchen. Imagine a buried root exchanging sugars for phosphorus. Through fungal mediation, imagine old stone stippled with lichen, each patch a century-long conversation. Imagine a burned hillside where black soil already hides the first preparations. For next season's fruiting, imagine the deep underground vastness of one organism spreading farther than anyone walking above would ever guess. Imagine all this happening at once. Slowly, softly, without demand. The kingdom does not need to be loud to be immense. It does not need to be visible to be foundational. It does not need to hurry to change the world. And so, as this journey thins towards sleep, let the mushrooms return to where they belong, most naturally, not on the page, not in a list, not even in a voice, but in the dark earth itself. Let them sink back into root shade and moss, into rot and rain, into bread and cloud, and old bark and hidden stone. Let the names fade, but not the feeling. The feeling is simple now, that beneath the ordinary surface of things, there is a patient kingdom working in grace. If there is comfort in that, keep it. If there is wonder in that, let it stay unforced. If there is drowsiness in that, let it deepen. The night is wide enough to hold all of it. The science, the strangeness, the beauty, the danger, the hidden labor, the quiet exchange. And beneath the night, the mycelium keeps weaving, far away, perhaps beyond the last houses. Rain is beginning again on a forest. No one is watching. Drops touch bark, needle, fan, and fallen branch. Somewhere under that rain, a hidden network receives the message. Moisture enters the old channels. Pressure gathers. A small pale cap loosens in the dark soil. By dawn it may rise, not to announce itself loudly, only to join the long, quiet conversation between earth and air. For a moment, if sleep finds you now, let it find you there, above the calm underground kingdom, while spores drift like invisible stars. And the earth, in its own dark language, keeps weaving,